Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. This week in Illinois in Focus, we'll discuss a new audit that shows taxpayer costs for providing health care to non-citizens exploded. The Illinois State Board of Education is saying it is not complying with President Donald Trump's executive order regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools. And more gun control bills are being debated at the Capitol. All that and more when we return.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer, and I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. An Illinois Auditor General report on taxpayer-subsidized health benefits for non-citizens rose more than 286% from 2021 to 2023, and now has cost the state taxpayers $1.6 billion in total. Joining me to discuss this is Illinois Associate Editor Greg Bishop. Greg, tell our listeners about this new audit.
So this is an audit that was requested by the Legislative Audit Commission. It's a bipartisan panel of state legislators from both parties and both chambers, and they work closely with the Illinois Auditor General to take a look at, compliance audits and just regular every 2 years audits of state agencies. Well, last year, the Audit Commission requested the Auditor General to do a deep dive into what's called the Health Benefits for Immigrant Seniors, HBIS, and Health Benefits for Immigrant Adults, HBIA. These are two separate funds and programs that were passed within the past 5 years, Dan. We had the Health Benefit for Immigrant Seniors program that was implemented, I believe, in 2021. And when this first came about, made Illinois one of the first states to do such a thing, to have taxpayer subsidies for non-citizen migrants in the state of Illinois to cover healthcare costs. And I remember asking the state representative at that time about the program she was, proposing, and she said that the costs would not be much at all. She put the number at a very low couple of $1 million. Well, when the program was implemented, we obviously saw that program balloon, but then the following year, they went ahead and approved the HBIA program, which is for the adults. So you're talking age ranges from like 42 to 64 for the adults, and then 65 and up for the seniors. And even a couple of years ago, we saw a similar type of report come out with the estimates from the Health and Family Services Department that showed that the program was costing more than estimated, with projected costs of $500 million or more for both of these programs, and the number of people that were joining the programs continued to balloon. So a couple of years ago, Republicans put a really bright spotlight on this, saying that these programs are far too expensive and the cost overruns are out of control. And it brought the governor to the point where he said he's going to have some more checks on these things, and he even put a cap on both of the programs and tried to get some co-pays built into the programs. Well, there's been a lot of pushback from Democrats at the State House on that idea from a couple of years ago. Now the governor, during his budget address last week, he actually proposed getting rid of the Health Benefits for Immigrant Adults program, something that he had estimated would save the state, $30 million or so, if not more. But he was going to keep the Health Benefits for Immigrant Seniors program in his state budget proposal. That as well got pushback from Democrats and various other immigrant advocacy groups like the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. They're pushing for that program to not just be kept in place, but to expand it even more. So that's all the background here, Dan, right? Last week, we had the governor's proposal, pushback on that. This week, we got that audit out. So the Illinois Auditor General released that audit where you said there was 280+% increase in what was actually estimated the program was going to cost. We're talking about close to $900 million it cost the state just for 2 years. But since its inception, has cost state taxpayers $1.6 billion. And it's not just the cost overruns, Dan. The audit also found that there weren't tight controls within the state departments that were helping manage this to go after ineligible non-citizens, people who, say that they were undocumented but had a social security number. How does that work? So the audit highlighted that. The audit also highlighted that they found hundreds in the seniors program that were not older than 65. And a lot of different things popping out of this audit, raising red flags that, number one, it's far too expensive, and the estimated number of participants and the estimated cost is much, much lower than what the actual cost and participation is. But you also have these issues with, checking the eligibility of those who are enrolled in this. And it's got Republicans saying there needs to be complete transparency on this issue. Some are calling for it to be shut down entirely because taxpayers can't afford this. And Senate Minority Leader John Curran said, this is why we have an unbalanced budget. This is why we have deficits, because these types of programs not only cost taxpayers, it also crowds out funding for other vital services like education or like infrastructure. So clearly this is an issue as legislators put together a budget for the next fiscal year. It's going to be loggerheads as Republicans continue to hammer on this program, saying that it attracts non-citizens to Illinois for these taxpayer subsidies. And Democrats saying that the subsidies need to be expanded and that the programs need to be kept in place. And there needs to be, quote, progressive revenue to help pay for all of this. How it's going to come out in the wash, Dan, we'll be at the Capitol with the Center Square in the wee hours of the morning whenever this gets put together in the budget implementation bill, and whether or not they're going to get rid of the adults program or if they'll keep that program and beef it up even more with taxpayer subsidies.
Greg, now that $1.6 billion figure, that is strictly these two healthcare programs for non-citizens, adults, and then senior citizens. And that does not include other costs related to essentially the tens of thousands of non-citizens who came to Chicago, who came to Illinois during the Biden administration when the Biden administration had these wide open border policies. So it does not include taxpayer costs for shelter, for food, for transportation and things like that, right? So just want to put this in perspective.
You're absolutely right. Those are additional costs not included in that $1.6 billion. So you're talking housing and hotels, you're talking food, you're talking education, and even attorneys' services for non-citizens, right. Let alone whatever kinds of grants that the state's giving to nonprofit organizations that work with non-citizens. So, $1.6 billion sounds like a lot of money, but when you start taking into account all of the other spending that taxpayers are on the hook for hotels or for lawyers' services, that number definitely increases substantially.
And as you mentioned, Greg, Illinois Governor Pritzker gave his State of the State and budget address a week ago, proposed spending a record $55.2 billion in taxpayer dollars. There are concerns. It's significantly up more than $2 billion from the current fiscal year that we're in. There are concerns about a deficit, budget deficits. You think that's going to impact these discussions in Springfield at the Capitol when it comes to these migrant services?
I don't know how it can't, because reality sits in, right? I mean, you look at the numbers and the state constitution says that the budget has to spend what revenues are projected. So if the revenues are projected only a certain amount, they're not going to be able to spend beyond that. But one thing that's interesting, Dan, is I've been at the State House covering this place for 11 years now, and it's always at the tail end of May, that May 31st deadline, where we see not just the budget line by line come out in the wee hours of the morning, the final few days of session, but also the budget implementation bill. And that's kind of the mechanism that, puts taxes in certain places, shifts funds here, shifts funds there, changes certain policies. And even today on the House floor, before the House adjourned, State Representative Adam Niemerg, he highlighted how the initial program for non-citizens to get health care services, the taxpayer cost, was not passed through legislation, a standalone bill. Its inception was actually included in what's called the BIMP, the Budget Implementation Bill. And the media doesn't get to see that until just before it's actually voted on, which means that the taxpayers don't get to see that until it's, right before it's voted on.
Moving on, Greg, completely unrelated story, but still related to the budget. Of course, lawmakers are in session. The Illinois State Board of Education made its budget request this week to lawmakers. One thing that they were asked during the budget hearing is if they were complying with the new President Donald Trump administration's executive order regarding DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, initiatives and programs in schools. Trump had said if school systems don't eliminate their DEI programs and initiatives, that the federal government could withhold federal dollars going to the districts or the state. And a state superintendent of schools, Tony Sanders, told lawmakers that they're not complying with Trump's executive order. Tell us more about that.
And this ultimately could lead to a withholding of funds to the amount of $2.2 billion coming to the state from the federal taxpayers to fund things like special education and other educated-related services. Yeah, so we're in the season now where all the state agencies are going to go to the various committees in front of legislators and pitch their budget. The State Board of Education, they're looking for more than $11 billion in spending, nearly $500 million more than the year before. So they lay all that out, and it's for continuing safe schools and teacher salaries and grants for this and funds for that. But in that conversation, State Representative Blaine Wilhauer asked about whether or not the State Board of Education got the letter from the Trump administration about ceasing diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Superintendent of Schools, Tony Sanders, he said that they received this Dear Colleague letter, and he notes that in the letter it said it does not have the force of law. So he turned around and told all of the educators to continue as they are, continue teaching as they have been. That includes, with a focus of DEI within their curriculum, for instance. The question of, if it comes down to it and the state loses that $2.2 billion from federal taxpayers, Tony Sanders said that the State Board of Education does not have that worked into their budget. So clearly, this is gonna come to a head at some point because Trump has been very aggressive, including going to courts and having to defend his orders. And that's something else that Sanders said. He said that he believes a lot of this is going to be tied up in the courts, but courts do come to some resolution at some point. And when that comes to a resolution, could we see the state of Illinois have these funds withheld? Now, the state of Illinois is already in loggerheads with the Trump administration. Earlier this week, the Pritzker administration and the Democrat congressional delegation sent a letter to the White House demanding answers about what they said was a withholding of $1.8 billion in various different types of grants for state agencies and boards and commissions that they say these agencies aren't able to access. So, this is just the beginning here, right? I mean, how long has Trump been in office? Just over a month. And with the policies he's trying to get enacted, everything from ending DEI to even his push to have paper ballots, same-day voting, and voter ID. These types of things are going to run contrary to what the Democrats in Springfield want to have happen. So clearly, there's going to be a lot more to write and say about all of these things, not just the education budget, but just simply the large amount of federal tax dollars that pour into Illinois.
Greg, you used the word loggerheads to describe the fighting between Illinois politicians, Illinois Democrats, and the Republican Trump administration. There's also the issue of illegal immigration and immigration and customs enforcement policies over the deportations. And Chicago's a sanctuary city, Illinois is a sanctuary state. This really could, this could get ugly.
Well, and you're already seeing the public in Chicago pretty upset with the Chicago mayor and the city council because of the ongoing sanctuary status policies. And here soon, Dan, we're actually going to have Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson in Congress to testify about this. And he's been very defiant in the face of the federal government now under the Trump administration cracking down on immigration. And that's going to be some fireworks, I anticipate, when Johnson testifies to Congress. And even this week, one Chicago City resident during the Chicago City Council, he stood up during public comments and he said, "Hey, Brandon Johnson, why don't you just comply for getting rid of the sanctuary city policies, because they say nobody wants it in Chicago except for some of the elite politicians." He said, "Why don't you do that in exchange for," he said, $20 billion. So, it may be a pie in the sky idea, but you can really feel the sentiment in that from some of the public that address the city council of their frustrations. They feel that they're being pushed aside. They feel that the tax dollars that have been spent on non-citizen migrants, they feel that the lawlessness of going against federal immigration law by having these sanctuary policies in place that shield migrants from federal immigration enforcement. Keep in mind, Dan, the U.S. Department of Justice with Attorney General Pam Bondi has a pending lawsuit against the city of Chicago, against Brandon Johnson, against Illinois, against Governor J.B. Pritzker over these sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies. So, like I said, we're only just over a month in the Trump administration, and it's clear that they are aggressively going after these various states and jurisdictions that seem to be, flouting the federal immigration law. And a lot of people also pointing out that, the governor here in Illinois, he criticizes the Trump administration, saying that he's not following the law, he's not following the courts. While he's ultimately trying to stand up against federal law when it comes to immigration, by saying that non-citizens who are here illegally, not breaking any other laws, then they should be, held safe from federal immigration authorities. But clearly that still is a violation of federal law to be in this country as an undocumented person. And this is gonna be something we'll talk about next week, guaranteed. We'll talk about it for weeks ahead, unless Illinois changes its sanctuary policies that shields non-citizens from federal immigration authorities.
Greg, you've been far and away the preeminent reporter covering Second Amendment issues in the state of Illinois, at least since a couple years ago. The state legislature banned more than 170 semi-automatic handguns and rifles and magazines over certain capacities. Followed the legislation through, covered the lawsuits and all of the legal challenges that are still ongoing over that lawsuit. Well, now we've got some new gun control measures, bills working their way through the state capitol. Why don't you share with our listeners what some of those are?
Yeah, so we've got a new Illinois House committee. So this is a new General Assembly. They have 2-year terms, and with the new General Assembly, they pass new rules that includes, either having the same committees from before or adding or subtracting committees. One committee they added for the House was the Illinois House Gun Violence Prevention Committee. So this is a committee that's going to just deal with issues around firearms. Last week, they had a hearing and they touched on several bills. One, for instance, would say that somebody coming into Illinois from out of state, if they had a stalking misdemeanor conviction, then they wouldn't be able to purchase a firearm in Illinois and would be prohibited from having a firearm owner identification card. There was also another issue about how the state interacts with a federal e-trace program to track certain types of guns used in crimes. So that was last week. This week, they heard 3 other bills in all subject matter. They haven't moved on any of these, but they're having this committee as kind of a testing ground to debate and have questions so that these bills could possibly be refined. Well, this week, the Gun Violence Prevention Committee discussed 2 bills from State Representative Bob Morgan. One says that when you go to transfer your firearm to somebody else, the $2 fee that you pay, it's going to be bumped up to $10. And that extra money, Morgan's bill would ultimately take that and give it in grants to law enforcement across the state so that they can go and confiscate firearms from people who the state says are not in compliance with the firearm owner ID card law. So there was some interesting debate there. Number one, several people noted that the FOID card could be on its last legs because of litigation, especially in White County down in southern Illinois, a judge finding that the FOID card's unconstitutional for people who just want to have a firearm in their home. So that's working through the courts. But ultimately, some of the most pointed opposition was you're taking money from law-abiding citizens to use it to go after people who are not in compliance, and that's a problem for people who want to just simply exercise their Second Amendment rights. So that was one bill that Bob Morgan put forward. Again, just subject matter only. They did not pass this out of committee. Likely it's going to be refined and they'll bring it back to vote. But another bill that Bob Morgan had would create a task force, something that Illinois loves to do, create task forces and have meetings and discuss these things. So the task force would be focused on how to bring about a mandate for gun owners to have insurance. So Morgan says this is like a rider on your home insurance contract. You've got flooding insurance. You've got small business cybersecurity insurance. This would just be another insurance product that would help with any kind of liabilities that there may be from somebody who has a firearm and maybe they use it or however the insurance might kick in. But the problem is with this, Dan, and the Second Amendment community pointed this out during a committee hearing this week, there's no legitimate gun owner insurance program out there right now, anywhere across the country. There are some programs that pretend to act like an insurance program, but there have been allegations of fraud and fingers pointing all over the place. So there's no real legitimate, insurance type of product that people can go out and buy. So, are we going to see this task force come together to debate this and come, forward with some proposed legislation, and what that would look like? Again, that's something has yet to be seen because we don't even have the task force yet. They're just talking about mandating insurance, right? But the Second Amendment community pushing back on this, and in particular, one legislator said that this is just contrary to somebody wanting to exercise their fundamental Second Amendment rights, and it would be a penalty for somebody if they wanted to exercise their Second Amendment rights. They would have to go out and get insurance. So clearly, another bill where they're just talking about something. We'll see just how far this goes. At the Center Square, we'll be tracking this closely.
Greg, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all of these stories and more at thecentersquare.com.